So what we were doing is we were trying to stay inside of that center cut loop of the city as we were looking at properties. And so the three properties inside of that loop that we really dove into were the Wisner site, the McCarroll School site, and the former YMCA building. So that's the McCarroll site. The Wisner site. The Wisner site is probably our favorite site from the standpoint of it is 21 acres. It gives you the largest flexibility to actually, the item that we have to face with that site is that site is not currently actively for sale. It is currently leased by Lee Industrial. And so Lee Industrial was one of the companies that we worked with as we did our review of all of the different spaces that we looked at. And they actually suggested that they would be interested in leaving their lease in order for us to move into that building. Leaving their lease, who is the owner of the building? The Pontiac schools are currently still the owner of that property.
But if I could just initially, what are you truly looking for? Just open feedback? Because when I'm reading this, I see that there is a time deadline on one of your two finalists. And so I'm trying to ascertain what are your ultimate needs and what's your timeline that you're contending with? And if you don't...
What we're really looking for tonight is ideally some consensus from City Council. And again, I know consensus is a loose word, and I'm intentionally using a loose word, but some sense from a majority of City Council as to City Council's preference. And that could be, hey, we prefer the McCarroll site, we prefer the Wisner site. It could be we prefer the YMCA site. I mean, we have concerns about it because it's not new construction, and we're somewhat constrained as a result in what the center would ultimately look like as a result. It also could be we don't like any of these three sites, and we think there's some other site. Now, what that site is would be lost on us unless it's a currently city-owned site. If folks have questions about any specific sites, feel free to ask those sites. We've reached out to, I think, virtually every, this might be overstating it a little bit, but to almost every owner of former schools, for example. And most of the former school buildings are in really tough shape. In some instances, we didn't hear back from some of the owners of schools, or they said they weren't prepared to show us the school, which we did not take as a good sign. But feel free to ask about any other specific locations. But it would be nice to have a sense from a majority of council as to what direction you'd like us to pursue.
So I'm next on the speakers list. What I enjoy about the McCarroll site is how close it is to multiple large park lands that the city already has in its control. We have already made the determination that Oakland Park will have a substantial recreational boost by the new skate park that will be there. So I think that's a priority. My concern is about where we are in the timeline. And based on what information is provided, I almost feel like this will be inflammatory, but we've been Deirdre Waterman. If you look about the Gulf Drive site, or even before that, the Wisner School site, where you had like days to make a very consequential decision. So I understand that's not the position you're trying to put us in, but we have a very definite deadline where the McCarroll site, if that were to be one of our finalists, is teetering on the brink of not being available anymore. I think that, to Pro Tem Carrington's point about viability long term, I don't think we necessarily want to be in the business of trying to go down the rabbit hole of spending all our money on trying to bring McCarroll into the 21st century. So my concern is that we pursue what's attainable, and we do it in a way that allows us to expand as resources allow. Because, and you tell me if that works well with efficiency of cost, but if we're able to either have a fallow site or we demolish and create a new site where we can build a new youth recreation center that has a realistic footprint, but then has the ability to expand as the federal funding is able to be secured. And I'm grateful that the administration's been thinking about how do you capture some of the American Rescue Plan dollars of the county to match what we're going to pursue, presumably with our American Rescue Plan dollars, partnered with the $3 million plus that the previous city council has already earmarked, and that's sat there for this purpose. How quickly can we dial that up? And I know you've been considering what are the sites that allow us to begin doing youth recreation there quickly and then be able to scale up. But that's where kind of some of my initial concerns are. But I appreciate you taking into consideration where we are geographically with the whole city. And I think that we want any recreation facility to be able to be a multiplier effect, that it can stabilize neighborhoods, it can improve our existing park spaces, it will be beautiful for if seen from a major thoroughfare, that we can have a lot of benefit beyond just the recreation benefit. I think that wherever site we end up, even if it's something that, a rabbit out of a hat that we haven't considered, that we could try and leverage our SMART funding, because they kind of have those community dollars that, depending on where the will of the people is in the very near future, but that if we can try and creatively create something, neighborhood connector shuttles, because I'm thinking about mainly youth using that, or youth with maybe, a guardian or a parent accompanying them maybe for the trip there and back. But if there can be some sort of connector shuttle that doesn't necessarily have to be handcuffed to the existing SMART bus route or the bus route plus some, that, again, we'd have to work through the logistics of it, but then allows it to be more accessible wherever it is. And I see those issues with any site. Obviously, the YMCA is literally almost like in the center in terms of just out of downtown. But if it was there, I'm thinking about what's around it and how could that complement youth recreation? How would that feel like an attractive destination for children, on foot or being dropped off? That I think that I like the concept of the recreation and green space opportunities, so that way they can be integrated together for the generations to come. And that's certainly true with Wisner, and for full public disclosure, many people know just south of that is Oakland County's Historical Society, of which I am the executive director. So I'll work to not, that cuts both ways. I'll work to not have that be a factor in my decision. But there is a lot of benefit to Wisner already being a place where recreation happens for the community. There's just not enough current facilities that work for a year-round operation without a lot of reconfiguration. So my main question, I've gone in a lot of directions, but I'll yield now to the mayor or deputy mayor about, are you thinking for McCarroll that we're talking about acquisition, demolition, and then are you thinking about doing the whole, ideal, top-notch full facility, new construction? Or were you thinking of keeping that structure, doing some, salvage, Band-Aid stuff, adding, or it'd be like, what are you looking at? And I know that you are here getting our temperature, so I'm throwing it back at you that I'd like some temperature back specifically for that site.
Yeah, so you've hit on a lot of important points.
I'm sorry, that's how my mind goes.
No, that's a good thing. First of all, it was certainly not our intention for you or for us to sort of jam us up on this time frame with McCarroll. It's interesting because just in terms of location and centrality in the city, and it's actually a little south of the true geographic center of the city, but just in terms of the geographic centrality of the location, my preference would be the YMCA site in terms of the centrality, because it's close to downtown. It's really south central in the community. We looked at a lot of different places. Centrally located is a tricky term, of course. I mean, if you look at the map that Deputy Mayor Stevens provided along with his the memo, I mean, in sort of the literal sense of centrally located, the McCarroll school site's probably about as centrally located in the city geographically as they come. I mean, you look at it and it's about equally located from east to west and from north to south. So in some literal sense of what centrally located means, meaning in the dead center geographically of the city, McCarroll School is it, frankly. Now but having said that, you know, there are other considerations that play into centrally located, bus line access, for example, but also perception. I mean, and perception doesn't necessarily line up with, and perception is important here because we want it to be in a location where everybody in the community can feel invested in. And so just because something may literally be in the dead center geographically of the city does not mean it's centrally located in a cultural sense or in a community buy-in sense. So, and I don't want us collectively to make a decision saying, well, we want to go with the site where there's some usable space currently, if in the longer term that's not the right decision for the city. I think it's important for us to make a decision based on the longer term considerations of, hey, what is the right location? What is the right site that allows us to build and add on over time and hopefully have a really great campus as a community center that accommodates youth recreation and potentially other community center purposes in the future too. It doesn't have to be totally limited to just youth recreation over time. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, President McGinnis, but I'm trying to answer certain components of your question, including how would we likely use the McCarroll School site. I think certainly demolition would probably apply for the newer school and possibly, but not necessarily, for the older school portion of that site.
Councilwoman James is next on the speakers list.
Yes, my priorities would be, number one, I'd like to see our community center be centrally located in the city. I think we owe it to ourselves to do the hard work to really find a spot that is on a major thoroughfare in a central location within the city. And the three that we're looking at, to be real honest, I'm not overly impressed with any of them. Wisner is at least new. It's usable right now. It has some appeal because of that, but the location is not the best. I don't think McCarroll's location is really, the best. It's kind of sitting off of Mount Calm. It is near other parks and things, but I just still don't think it's really in a central. It's in a really good location, and I prefer new as opposed to old. I think we owe it to ourselves, with the changes in weather and we owe it to ourselves to build an energy efficient building and something that looks to the future and not to the past.
No site currently that is a magic, rub the lantern and here it's got all that we need. It doesn't exist. That's why it hasn't been chosen yet. So whatever we pursue, we're going to have to do a lot of multiple years of bringing it to the quality and caliber where it can be fully usable. Mm-hmm. So if you're making me choose between Wisner and Purdue, even though Wisner is outside of District 7 and outside of the East Side and doesn't then solve what we must solve with Purdue anyway, I would choose between the two. I would choose Wisner. Thank you. So that was a non-binding exercise. But hopefully it gave you a lot of perspective as you move expeditiously. Any final conversation on that discussion? Do you have the clarity you need, Mayor and Deputy Mayor?
I think we do, to be honest. I mean, it's, I think there's, some trepidation, at least I think there's some trepidation about price or not being price gouged anyway with the Wisner site. But It seems like a majority of city council clearly prefers the Wisner site over McCarroll. I think that's came across pretty loud and clear.
And do you have a sense of timing on when should the city council next expect a more comprehensive next phase in this consideration?
We are going to immediately reach back out to the school district tomorrow and try to get a definitive timeline from the school district about when we can get a substantive answer from them. And we'll give you, President McGinnis, and President Pro Tem Carrington an update as soon as we get a clear sense of timeline from the school district.
Thank you. Any further discussion? With that, we move to the next discussion very briefly.